We've all seen it, right? The dramatic rescue footage after a hurricane, the rubble after an earthquake, the immediate chaotic aftermath. But what happens weeks, months, or even years later when the world's attention has completely moved on? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. You see, when the storm passes and the camera crews pack up, we kind of assume the recovery starts. We see images just like this one, the obvious physical destruction, and we think, wow, what a tragedy, and we think we get it. But honestly, this is just scratching the surface. Because the truth is, that's often the moment the real disaster begins. The one that unfolds in total silence, far away from any headline. What we see on the news is really just the tip of this enormous iceberg of suffering. And what's lurking beneath the surface? Well, that's a whole cascade of hidden crises that go on and on long after the first event is over. For survivors, it's like a triple whammy of trauma. First, you've got the immediate physical dangers left behind. Then comes the deep psychological wounds. And finally, you're looking at the complete financial and systemic collapse of your entire life. Yeah, the environment itself can become the enemy. Those floodwaters, they're not just water. They're a toxic soup of chemicals, of sewage. Mold starts growing in the walls, poisoning families and causing these horrible respiratory problems. And with no clean water, you get diseases like cholera sweeping through communities. Even the shelters, the very places meant to keep people safe, can become new hotspots for illness. And then, of course, you have the invisible scars. The PTSD from just surviving something so terrifying is huge. But here's something you might not think about. This idea of secondary trauma. It's the soul-crushing, exhausting stress of fighting with insurance companies or trying to navigate these impossible aid systems. It can honestly feel like a second disaster hitting you all over again.
And this is the most important part. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They all feed each other. So the mold in the house leads to your kid's asthma. That creates huge medical bills you can't pay, all while you're still grieving and fighting an insurance claim that just got denied. It's this devastating, inescapable cycle.
Okay, so now let's zoom out. This horrible cycle of suffering isn't just happening to one family in one town. It's happening on a global scale, in places the world has pretty much decided to ignore. This is the massive, hidden part of that iceberg. And that brings us to the core idea we're exploring today, the forgotten disaster. It's a crisis where less media coverage means less public awareness, which, you guessed it, means less aid and less money. The result is this vicious cycle, where the suffering just gets worse and worse, simply because nobody is watching. I mean, just to give you an idea of the scale here, let's start with Angola. Right now, there's a historic drought, the worst they've seen in 40 years. It's causing 2.2 million people to face severe hunger. And yet, have you heard much about it? Or how about the Central African Republic? Here you have this devastating mix of conflict and extreme climate, and it's displaced 1 out of every 5 people. Just stop and think about that. 1/5 of an entire country's population was no place to call home. And then there's Madagascar. It's one of the most vulnerable nations on Earth when it comes to climate. A staggering 80% of the people there live below the poverty line, completely trapped in this relentless cycle of cyclones, then floods, then drought. How can anyone ever recover? And, behind these giant, mind-numbing numbers are real people. People like Juvenal Africa from Burundi. His words just perfectly capture that feeling of being abandoned. He said, "The floods took everything we had. Now we have nothing, and no one seems to care." So this leads to the big question, right? With so much suffering out there, why? Why do these massive crises become forgotten? Well, the answer is kind of tangled up in these invisible currents of our global attention economy. So yeah, why is the world so silent? How can millions and millions of people be in crisis with barely a whisper on the global stage? Well, a big part of it comes down to what's called the economics of attention. Modern media is often built for clicks, not for covering complex, long-term stories. That can lead to something called compassion fatigue, where we, the audience, just get overwhelmed and tune out. And here's the kicker. Donor money follows the spotlight. When the media moves on, the money dries up. Okay, this chart right here just illustrates the problem perfectly. It's wild. In 2024, rumors that the band Oasis might get back together generated over 125,000 news articles. In that same period, Angola's historic drought, threatening over 2 million lives, got fewer than 2,000. That gap, That massive disparity, that's the whole crisis in a single picture. But look, it does not have to be this way. It feels bleak, but we can actually change this. So, how do we start remembering the forgotten? The path forward really involves 4 key shifts. We need dedicated funding that isn't tied to whatever's trending. We have to create inclusive plans that protect everybody. We've got to empower local leaders who are on the ground. And we need to demand better, more nuanced reporting from our media. Let's just zero in on that inclusive planning piece, because it's so critical. People with disabilities, who make up 16% of the world's population, are 2 to 4 times more likely to die in a disaster. And why is that? Because evacuation plans and shelters are often totally inaccessible to them. Forgetting them isn't just an oversight, it's a potential death sentence. Now, dedicated funding, we know it's possible and it works. The European Union has actually created a fantastic model for this. They've already committed 15% of their entire humanitarian budget specifically to these forgotten crises. That's a huge institutional shift from aid based on attention to aid based on need. It's proof that we can build systems that remember for us. And the stakes here could not be higher. In Africa alone, right now, 35 million people are affected by forgotten crises that just aren't getting the support they so desperately need. At the end of the day, it all boils down to one core ethical principle. Humanitarian aid has to be impartial. It has to be based on need and need alone, not on what's trending on social media, not on 24-hour news cycles, and definitely not on political convenience. You know, in the end, it's this simple. Every single life matters. And if that's true, if we really believe that, then no crisis and no person should ever be forgotten. So the question for all of us is, what does a world that actually lives by that principle look like?